Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. Story number 2. The Promise, written by Pickpocket. When I was little, very, very little, there was a story my father told me of strange people with featureless faces and heavy metal bodies. Monsters who would lurk in the shadows out beyond the endless dark. Beings of twisted hatred and merciless violence. He would tell me if I wasn't home before dark that they would come. He would say that I had to be quiet and very, very still when he said so. I had to follow instructions without question. When the Chivalry came, with their chains and whips and instruments of torture, I watched as they dragged my friends, my neighbors, my father away. Had to accept that I would never see them again, and it hurt. But my mother told me another story, a story about a rock, a monument to this inevitable fate. Carved on its surface were ancient words which supposedly set forth a mandate of dominion. In time, the Chivalry would be overthrown, but in place of liberty, we instead found enslavement at another's hands. We suffered and died, our numbers dwindling one by one. Overlords changed, and still the cycle repeated. Still the takers took, and we, the conquered, suffered. Eventually, I too was taken, a shackle around my leg and binding my throat. I was driven into the cramped, hot depths of a mine far, far away from a homeland that I'd once known. I watched as 1,000 different species toiled and died in the endless dark, and I made peace with never seeing the sun again. And yet, in the suppressive dark, I found yet another storyteller, one who sat beneath the poor lighting of our barracks and sang of an old friend called Mar-En, who long, long ago made a promise, one they carved into the very stone of the world. As months turned to years and years to decades, still the singer with her strange and even shifting hair would sing about her promise, sing in that soulful melodic tone, a tone that wound its way into my mind, convincing me of its truth. It too convinced more than me. Others took the song to heart. They raised their voices and their picks. They were swiftly massacred and left to rot in the hot, claustrophobic dark of the tapped-out mine. And then the day came when the last vein ran dry, and our masters, the Zinfara, or maybe the Urcus, wished to crush our spirits once more. They dragged us before the mighty stone they called the Pillar of Supplication, and made us kneel, offered many, many words of their superiority, their greatness. I think they did not look closely enough. There I sat at the foot of the great dais, its ancient stone littered with broken manacles, the monolith itself, a single most beautiful sight that I had ever laid my eyes upon. If the singer had not rose to run and touch its cold black surface, I think I would have instead. I forced myself to look away when they removed her hand for the offense. Yet she did not lament her loss. Instead, when I asked her about it, she smiled, leant in, and told me of the heroic Mar-En once more. Told me that the stone had spoken to her. I thought her driven to madness, but she insisted the stone spoke to her. It wanted its words to be heard, to be read by all. She told me it was no symbol of right to rule, but a warning, a promise. I did not believe her, but she was right. After that day, we grew closer as I aided her in her duties. We spoke of our homelands, our people's histories. She told me that the Mar-En was not a who, but a what. She told me about the grim sailors on an ocean of blood, of a promise made to her forebears and handed down. She, in time, told me what the stone had said. Where the spark of liberty falters, and the cruel oppress the weak, where none dare speak of you, reach out and take my offered hand. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. When no other dares, I shall speak for the voiceless. Where no other cares, I shall lift for the helpless. Where no other shall, I shall bleed for the defenseless. I swear upon 10,000 broken shackles. Shortly after, they came, the faceless, nameless monsters from the dark abyss. They came with great weapons, and I feared that they would have a massacre. Yet they left the slaves unarmed, mercilessly tore through our masses, but did not lift a finger towards us. Then I feared that we'd once again traded masters, but they shattered our chains. Then I thought they were an uprising, come to doom us all to retribution. But when I heard their name, I understood. My dear singer's promise had been kept. The Marines had come. They came and they sailed upon an ocean of blood. They came with guns and ships, and they tore across the galaxy flying a simple standard, a golden star on a black field. They came to bleed for the defenseless and speak for the voiceless. In the decades that followed, these nameless, faceless soldiers faded away once more. But the monument to their promise grew. To this day, in the Centaurial Plaza, you can see the 100,000 shackles the brave Marines offered at the foot of their promise stone. In the council halls of the Fair Union, their words carved in stone spread to every corner of our galaxy and told to every child. For they left us with a promise. They promise that we must keep in their absence. We must speak for the voiceless, lift for the helpless, and, if need be, bleed for the defenseless. That is the legacy of the nameless, faceless Marines, the Human Pyre of Liberty. End of story. Story number 1. Mercy is for the Weak, written by Dragonson04. Our most hated enemy has finally beaten us. After a full century of drawn-out conflict, they had finally taken our whole world. We were utterly beaten. Barely 10% of our population remained alive, and in a state to actually repopulate. 40% were so physically or mentally damaged, they would never be able to make the next generation of our species. The remaining 50% were dead, cold and dead on countless worlds, moons, and in the void of space on countless destroyed ships. I have no idea how many of the enemy died, but it obviously wasn't enough to turn the war in our favor. Walking along under the careful guard of 10 others, I finally got a look at one of them. Hard to believe, I know, but in a century, I had never seen one of them outside of propaganda materials. They were head and shoulders shorter than us, but with a mass and bulk that put us to shame. A product of where they evolved, or so I understand. We were almost ethereal in comparison, being tall and thin reptilians. Their powered armor, or battle suits, or whatever you want to call them, squeaked and hissed as they moved, the boots shaking on the ground with every step. I almost felt a rhythm, a kind of syncopated beat. Thud, 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 hiss, thud, squeak, thud. It was soothing, in a way. The sound gave me something to focus on, other than my rapidly approaching demise. We neared a fairly large base of theirs, likely to be interrogated and then executed. I steeled my resolve, while a few of the others didn't. They started to blubber and beg. I held my silence by pure willpower, for fear that I would break and join them. We were escorted to a landing area, and one of our own ships was on the ground. The engines were primed, and it was ready to leave. Our escort dispersed. "What is this? Some kind of trick?" I shouted. One of them turned back a half step and said, "You are beaten. There is nothing to be gained by killing the few of you left. Take that and go home." His voice sounded odd through his suit's auditory amplifier system. "What is the meaning of this?" I shouted again. "It is not a trick. It is a mercy. Maybe in the future your kind will be wiser. Go home, find a mate, and teach your children of your mistakes. See to it that they do not make the same ones you did. Mercy? Spare us your pity and mercy. Mercy is for the weak, I shrieked. Which is exactly why we are showing it to you. You are beaten, and our hard-won peace is finally happening after 100 years. We are the stronger, you are the weaker. Mercy is indeed for the weak, because mercy is what the weak need. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barkey, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.